I'm Laura, and I'm 19 years old. You don't have the class to talk to important people, my mother said, shoving a pile of greasy dishes into my hands while my sister Clara chatted with the mayor's wife at table 6. The lunch rush was in full swing, and there I was again, invisible, replaceable, and apparently too rough around the edges for customer service. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. You'll definitely want to stick around for what happened next. Let me take you back to where this all started. Picture a 5-year-old standing on a wooden crate just to reach the industrial sink, soap bubbles up to her elbows, washing dishes that seemed bigger than she was. That was my childhood. Not playing with dolls or watching cartoons, but scrubbing pots and pans at Grandpa's restaurant. The place had been in our family since 1987, when my grandfather bought it with his life savings after immigrating from Italy. He called it Nonna's Kitchen, and it was his pride and joy. Every morning at 5 a.m., he'd unlock those heavy glass doors and transform the empty dining room into something magical. The smell of fresh garlic and basil would fill the air, and by noon, every table would be packed with regulars who came not just for the food, but for Grandpa's warm smile and terrible dad jokes. Mom inherited the restaurant when she was barely 19 and pregnant with me. My father had disappeared the moment he found out about the pregnancy, leaving her trapped in a life she never wanted. She dreamed of becoming a teacher, maybe traveling the world, but instead found herself tied to a business that demanded every waking hour. From the day I could walk, I was part of the operation. While other kids played outside, I learned the difference between a soup spoon and a teaspoon, how to fold napkins into perfect triangles, and most importantly, how to stay out of Mom's way when she was stressed, which was basically always. The restaurant became my second home, or rather, my only home. Our actual apartment above the restaurant was just a place to sleep between shifts. The real living happened downstairs, among the chaos of orders being shouted, plates clattering, and the constant hum of the industrial dishwasher that became the soundtrack to my childhood. Clara arrived 3 years later, and everything changed. Suddenly, there was this perfect little angel who could do no wrong, while I was expected to be the responsible one. When Clara was old enough to help, she somehow always ended up with the easy jobs, greeting customers with her sweet smile, bringing water to tables, making small talk with the regulars who would slip her dollar bills and tell her how precious she was. Me? I got the dishes. Always the dishes. Laura's better at the back-of-house stuff, Mom would say whenever anyone asked why Clara got to work the front while I scrubbed grease off industrial pans. She's more practical. That was Mom's polite way of saying I wasn't pretty enough, charming enough, or good enough to represent the family business. And maybe she was right. By age 10, I had calluses on my hands and a permanent smell of dish soap that no amount of perfume could mask. Clara, meanwhile, learned how to bat her eyelashes and remember customers' names, skills that apparently made her more valuable than my ability to single-handedly clean the entire kitchen during a dinner rush. The worst part wasn't the work itself, it was the invisibility. Customers would compliment Clara's smile and Mom's cooking, but I might as well have been part of the kitchen equipment. I was just the girl who made sure the plates were clean and the coffee cups were spotless. But here's what they didn't know about that quiet kid washing dishes in the back. I was watching everything, learning every aspect of the business, and storing away every slight for future reference. Little did they know that one day, those hands covered in dish soap would be signing the papers that would change everything. The day I finally understood how deep the favoritism ran was my 10th birthday. It was a Tuesday in March, and the restaurant was particularly busy. I'd been working since 6 a.m., helping Mom prep vegetables for the lunch rush, and my back ached from standing on that wooden crate for hours. Clara, who was 7 and supposedly too young for real work, had spent the morning drawing pictures at table 4, while I scrubbed potato peels off industrial pots. Around noon, Mrs. Peterson came in. She was the wife of the bank president, and one of our most important customers. Mom immediately sprang into action, smoothing her apron and putting on her brightest smile. "Clara, sweetheart," she called out, completely ignoring me as I struggled to lift a heavy stock pot. "Come say hello to Mrs. Peterson. She loves to see how you've grown." I watched from the kitchen pass through as Clara practically skipped over to the woman, all smiles and curtsies. Mrs. Peterson made a huge fuss, commenting on Clara's pretty dress and how polite she was. Then she did something that made my stomach drop. She pulled out a $20 bill and handed it to my sister. "This is for being such a lovely young lady," Mrs. Peterson said, patting Clara's head. $20. That was more money than I'd ever seen at once, and Clara got it for literally just existing and looking cute. Meanwhile, I'd been working for 6 hours straight and hadn't even gotten a thank you from anyone. But what happened next was what really opened my eyes. Mom noticed me standing there, covered in flour and grease, watching the whole interaction. Instead of calling me over to meet Mrs. Peterson, she quickly moved to block the woman's view of me. "Laura's busy with kitchen duties," she said with a tight smile, subtly pushing me back toward the dishwasher. "We try to keep the work areas and dining areas separate for hygiene purposes." Hygiene purposes. As if I was some kind of contaminant that might spoil the pristine dining experience. I was 10 years old, and in that moment, I realized that my own mother was ashamed of me. Mrs. Peterson nodded approvingly, as if Mom had just demonstrated excellent business management. The two women continued their conversation while Clara basked in the attention, and I returned to my endless pile of dishes, feeling smaller than ever. That night, after we'd finally closed and cleaned everything, I worked up the courage to ask Mom about it. How come Clara gets to meet the important customers but I don't? Mom was counting the day's receipts, not really paying attention. Clara has a way with people. She's naturally charming. But I work harder than she does, I protested, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left my mouth. Mom's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with irritation. "Work isn't just about scrubbing dishes, Laura. Customer service is an art form. Some people are born with it and some aren't." The implication hung in the air like smoke from the kitchen grill. Clara was born with it. I wasn't. "Besides," Mom continued, softening slightly, "you're really good at the behind-the-scenes stuff. Every restaurant needs someone reliable in the kitchen." Reliable. There was that word again. It was becoming clear that reliable was code for invisible but useful. From that day forward, I stopped expecting to be included in the front-of-house activities. I carved out my own little world in the back, learning every aspect of kitchen operations, memorizing suppliers' phone numbers, and figuring out which distributors gave us the best prices. While Clara learned how to charm customers, I learned how to run a business, though nobody seemed to notice or care. The pattern continued for years. Clara got prettier, more charming, and more beloved by customers and Mom alike. I got stronger, more competent, and more invisible. By the time I was 13, I could run the entire kitchen operation single-handedly, but I was still introduced as our dishwasher to anyone who bothered to ask. The only person who seemed to see my worth was Grandpa. Even though he'd officially retired and handed the restaurant over to Mom, he still came in most afternoons to help with the dinner prep. He'd find me in the kitchen, usually elbow-deep in some thankless task, and would quietly slip me a piece of candy or tell me stories about the early days of the restaurant. "You know, Laura," he said one particularly difficult day when Mom had been especially harsh about my attitude, "this place needs someone who understands hard work. Pretty smiles don't keep a business running." Those words meant everything to a 13-year-old who felt invisible in her own family. But even Grandpa couldn't change the fundamental dynamic. In Mom's eyes, Clara was the star, and I was just the supporting cast. What none of them realized was that all those hours in the back, all that time being overlooked and underestimated, was teaching me lessons they'd never learn. I was absorbing everything about the business, understanding its weaknesses, and slowly forming plans that would take years to execute. The day I finally decided things had to change was the day I turned 16 and asked for something that should have been automatic for any working teenager. Picture this: a 16-year-old who'd been working at her family's restaurant for over a decade, finally working up the courage to ask for what every other teenager in America got for flipping burgers at McDonald's, an actual paycheck. I'd spent weeks rehearsing the conversation in my head. I had all my arguments lined up. I worked more hours than some of the part-time employees. I knew the business inside and out. And legally, I was old enough to earn minimum wage. It seemed reasonable, logical, fair. I should have known better. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon, and I found Mom doing paperwork in the tiny office behind the kitchen. Clara was at school, because unlike me, she got to attend classes instead of spending her afternoons scrubbing grease traps. "Mom," I started, trying to keep my voice steady, "I wanted to talk to you about something." She didn't look up from the invoices she was reviewing. If it's about getting more hours off for social activities, the answer is no. We can't afford to hire extra help. Actually, it's the opposite. I was hoping we could discuss getting paid for the work I do here. That got her attention. Mom's head snapped up so fast I thought she might get whiplash, and the look on her face was somewhere between shock and amusement. "Paid?" She said the word like I'd just asked her to buy me a Ferrari. "Yes. I've been working here for 11 years, and I think it's reasonable to expect some compensation. I'm 16 now, and legally..." "Legally?" Mom laughed. Actually laughed, cutting me off mid-sentence. "Laura, this is a family business. Family doesn't charge family for helping out. But Clara gets an allowance for doing basically nothing. And Clara is in school full-time and maintaining excellent grades. She helps here when she can, but her education comes first." Mom's voice was getting sharper. Unlike someone I know who seems to think the world owes her something for doing basic household chores. Household chores. 11 years of professional kitchen work, and she called it household chores. Mom, I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for fair payment for fair work. I put in 40 hours a week here, sometimes more. If you hired someone else to do what I do, you'd have to pay them. If I hired someone else, Mom said, standing up from her chair, they wouldn't have an attitude problem. And they'd understand that this family has given you everything you have. The roof over your head, the food you eat, the clothes on your back. That's your payment. I felt something shift inside me, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. For the first time, I was seeing the situation clearly. This wasn't about me not deserving payment. It was about Mom needing me to work for free. The restaurant wasn't doing well enough to pay me what I was worth, so instead, she'd convinced herself that I should be grateful for the privilege of unpaid labor. You know what, Mom? You're right. If you hired someone else, they wouldn't have an attitude problem. They'd also quit after a week of being treated like this. Mom's face went red. How dare you speak to me that way? After everything this family has done for you, what exactly has this family done for me? Given me a childhood of unpaid labor while my sister got to be a normal kid? Made me feel like I'm not good enough to interact with paying customers? Convinced me that asking for basic respect is having an attitude problem? The words were pouring out now. 11 years of resentment and frustration finally finding their voice. You are ungrateful and selfish, Mom said, her voice cold and controlled. And if you think you can do better somewhere else, you're welcome to try. But don't expect this family to support your education if you're not willing to support this family. There it was. The threat I'd been expecting. Stay and work for free, or lose any chance of going to college. Most teenage girls would have backed down at that point. Most would have apologized and gone back to washing dishes with their heads down and their mouths shut. But I wasn't most teenage girls. I was someone who'd been running a commercial kitchen since age 5, who knew every supplier's phone number by heart, and who had just realized that my mother's power over me was entirely dependent on my willingness to accept it. You know what, Mom? I think I will try somewhere else. The color drained from her face. She clearly hadn't expected me to call her bluff. Laura, don't be ridiculous. Where are you going to work? You have no experience outside of this restaurant. I almost laughed at the irony. No experience. I had more restaurant experience than most adults. I just needed to find someone willing to pay me for it. I guess we'll find out, I said, untying my apron for what I hoped would be the last time. Mom watched me walk toward the door, and I could tell she was warring between her pride and her panic. She needed me more than she'd ever admit, but she also couldn't bring herself to treat me with basic dignity. Fine, she called out as I reached for the door handle, but don't come crawling back when you realize how good you had it here. I paused with my hand on the door, looking back at the woman who'd spent 16 years convincing me that I was lucky to be exploited by my own family. Mom, I said quietly, I've never had it good here. That's why I'm leaving. The door closed behind me with a soft click, but it felt like the end of an era. For the first time in my life, I was walking away from everything I'd ever known, with nothing but my own determination to sustain me. What I didn't know was that the best decision of my life was waiting for me just 3 blocks away, in the form of a help wanted sign that would change everything. 3 days after walking out of Nana's kitchen, I found myself standing outside Tony's Bistro, a small family-owned restaurant near the local community college. The help wanted sign in the window felt like a lifeline, and I was desperate enough to grab it. The owner, Mrs. Santos, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who looked me up and down when I asked about the waitressing position. You got experience? She asked, wiping down glasses behind the counter. 11 years, I said, which was technically true even if most of it had been washing dishes. You're what, 16? 17? 16, but I've been working in restaurants since I was 5. That got her attention. Child labor, huh? Your parents okay with you working here? I hesitated. We had a disagreement about compensation. I decided to find employment elsewhere. Mrs. Santos laughed, a rich sound that filled the empty restaurant. Compensation disagreement at 16? Kid, I like you already. Tell you what, I'll give you a trial shift tonight. We're short-staffed for the dinner rush, and if you can handle it, the job is yours. If I could handle it? Lady, I'd been handling restaurant rushes since elementary school. That first shift was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was interacting with customers directly, taking orders, making recommendations, and actually being appreciated for my knowledge of food and service. When the night ended, Mrs. Santos handed me $67 in tips, more money than I'd ever held at once. You're a natural, she said, counting out my share of the tip pool. Most new servers take weeks to get the hang of table rotation, but you manage 6 tables like you've been doing it for years. Because I had been doing it for years, just not the front of house part. All those hours watching Clara interact with customers, all that time observing from the kitchen, had taught me exactly what good service looked like. Mrs. Santos offered me 20 hours a week to start, which would be perfect for fitting around my school schedule. For the first time in my life, I had a real job with real pay, and it felt like freedom. The phone call from Mom came 2 days later. "Laura, this has gone far enough," she said, skipping any pretense of greeting. "Mrs. Peterson asked where you were yesterday, and I had to make up some story about you being sick. You need to come back to work." "I have a job, Mom, at Tony's Bistro." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, she spoke again, and her voice was ice cold. "I see. Well, I hope you've thought about how you're planning to pay for college, because we certainly won't be helping someone who abandoned her family." There was the threat again, but this time it felt different. This time I had options. "I'll figure it out," I said. "Laura, be reasonable. You make good grades, but college is expensive. Your father and I were planning to help with tuition, but if you're not part of this family anymore—" "I never stopped being part of this family, Mom. You just never valued my contribution enough to pay me for it. We gave you room and board. You gave Clara room and board too, plus an allowance, plus the privilege of being treated like a human being instead of a kitchen appliance." The conversation ended with Mom hanging up on me, but I felt oddly relieved rather than upset. For years, I'd been afraid of losing their financial support for college, but now I realized something important. Their support came with chains attached. If working my way through college meant being free of those chains, it was a price worth paying. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my job at Tony's with an enthusiasm that surprised even me. Mrs. Santos noticed my dedication and started teaching me about front-of-house management, vendor relationships, and customer retention strategies, all the business skills I'd never learned while stuck in the kitchen at Nonna's. "You've got good instincts," she told me one evening as we closed up. "Have you ever thought about studying business or hospitality management?" The idea hadn't occurred to me, but suddenly it seemed perfect. I'd spent my entire childhood in the restaurant industry without ever considering that I could build a career from that experience. "I'm planning to apply to the community college for next fall," I said. "Maybe I could look into their business program." Mrs. Santos smiled. "Let me know if you need a reference. Anyone who can handle our dinner rush on their first night has management potential." Management potential. Those words echoed in my head for days. All my life, I'd been told I was good at behind-the-scenes work, reliable but not leadership material. For the first time, someone was suggesting I could be more than just a pair of hands doing invisible work. The final conversation with Mom about college came in May, right before graduation. "Laura, I'm giving you one last chance to come home and work this out," she said when she called. "Your father and I have been discussing it, and we're willing to pay for your first semester if you come back and help us through the summer." "What about a salary?" I asked. "Room, board, and college tuition. That's more than generous." "Mom, I'm making more money in 3 shifts at Tony's than you're offering me for 40 hours a week at Nonna's. Plus, Mrs. Santos treats me with respect." "Respect doesn't pay for textbooks, Laura." "Actually, it does. Respect means fair wages, which means I can afford my own textbooks." The silence stretched on for a long moment. Finally, Mom spoke again, and her voice was tired rather than angry. "Fine. You've made your choice. Don't expect us to help when you realize you can't afford college on a waitress salary. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. It teaches you to find ways to succeed that nobody else thinks of." While Mom was convinced I'd fail without family support, I was already planning how to make it work. Community college was affordable, especially with the scholarships I'd been applying for. Mrs. Santos had offered to work around my class schedule, and she'd hinted about promoting me to shift supervisor once I turned 18. Most importantly, for the first time in my life, I was excited about my future instead of feeling trapped by it. The person who understood this best wasn't Mom or Clara, it was Grandpa. The knock on my apartment door came on a Tuesday night in September, 2 weeks after I'd started my first semester of community college. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and financial aid paperwork, trying to figure out how to stretch $18 until my next paycheck. When I opened the door, Grandpa stood there holding a bag of groceries and wearing the gentle smile that had gotten me through so many difficult days at the restaurant. "I hope you don't mind the surprise visit," he said, holding up the groceries. "I brought supplies for dinner." I hadn't seen him since I'd left Nonna's kitchen 5 months earlier. Mom had made it clear that I was persona non grata at family functions, and I'd been too proud to reach out, afraid he'd side with her. "Grandpa, I started, but he held up his hand. "Before you say anything, let me tell you something. I'm proud of you." Those 4 words hit me like a physical blow. Nobody had said they were proud of me in, well, ever. He stepped into my small apartment, looking around at the secondhand furniture and textbooks scattered everywhere. This place suits you. Small but efficient. Everything you need and nothing you don't. While he cooked, and it was surreal watching him work in my tiny kitchen after years of seeing him in the restaurant's industrial setup, he told me what had been happening at Nona's since I left. Your mother hired 2 part-time dishwashers to replace you, he said, stirring a pot of his famous marinara sauce. Between the 2 of them, they do about half the work you used to do, and they're costing her more than she budgeted for. I felt a petty surge of satisfaction. How's Clara handling the extra responsibility? Grandpa chuckled. Clara's doing fine at the front of the house, but she's not interested in learning kitchen operations. Your mother is doing most of the prep work herself now. Good, I said, then immediately felt guilty for the vindictive response. Don't feel bad for being human, Grandpa said, reading my expression perfectly. Your mother made her choice when she decided your labor wasn't worth paying for. Now she's learning the cost of that decision. Over dinner, we talked about my classes, my job at Tony's, and my plans for transferring to a 4-year university after I finished my associate degree. Grandpa listened with the kind of genuine interest I'd never gotten from Mom or Clara. Business management with a focus on hospitality, he mused when I told him about my major. That's perfect for you. You understand the industry from the ground up. Mrs. Santos thinks I could run my own place someday, I said, still barely believing it myself. Mrs. Santos is a smart woman. You've got the work ethic, the knowledge, and the determination. The only thing you were missing was someone who recognized your potential. As he was getting ready to leave, Grandpa paused at the door and pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. This is from me, not from your parents, he said, pressing it into my hands. I know you're too proud to accept charity, so consider it a business investment. I'm investing in your future. Inside the envelope was $300, more money than I'd ever seen at once. There was also a note in his careful handwriting. For books, groceries, and believing in yourself. Your grandmother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming. I started crying right there in my doorway. All the stress and loneliness of the past 5 months finally catching up with me. Grandpa hugged me tight, and for a moment I felt like that little girl standing on a wooden crate, except this time someone was lifting me up instead of keeping me down. Your mother loves you, he said quietly, but she's afraid. She's afraid of losing the restaurant, afraid of not being good enough, afraid of a lot of things. Fear makes people do cruel things sometimes. That doesn't excuse how she's treated me. No, it doesn't. But understanding it might help you forgive her someday when you're ready. Grandpa started visiting once a week after that. He'd bring groceries or help me with particularly difficult homework, and he'd always leave with updates about my progress that I knew he was sharing with the rest of the family, whether they wanted to hear them or not. Laura made Dean's list. I'd hear him tell Mom on the phone one evening when he thought I was in the bathroom. She's also being considered for a promotion at Tony's. The promotion came in December, shift supervisor on weekends, with a raise that brought my hourly wage to $12. Mrs. Santos also started giving me more responsibilities, like scheduling other servers and handling difficult customers. You're management material, she told me during my review. I've been in this business for 30 years and I can spot leadership potential when I see it. Coming from someone who'd built her own successful restaurant from nothing, those words meant everything. It was during one of Grandpa's weekly visits that he mentioned Mom had been asking about me. She wants to know how you're doing, he said carefully, watching my reaction. She could call and ask me herself. Pride is a powerful thing, Laura. Sometimes it's harder to admit you were wrong than to just keep being wrong. I understood pride. I'd been living on it for months, refusing to ask for help even when I was down to ramen noodles and hope for dinner. But pride was also what had driven me to prove everyone wrong about my potential. Maybe someday, I said, but we both knew I wasn't ready yet. What I didn't know was that someday would come sooner than expected, and in a way that would change everything forever. The phone call that changed my life came on a Thursday morning in March. The call came at 6:47 a.m., waking me from the deep sleep that only comes after pulling a double shift and studying until 2 a.m. The number on my phone was Grandpa's, but the voice on the other end was Mom's, shaky and raw. Laura, she said, and I could hear tears behind the word. You need to come to the hospital. Grandpa, he had a heart attack. The world tilted sideways. I was dressed and in my car within 5 minutes, driving through empty morning streets with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and fear, and I found Mom and Clara in the cardiac unit waiting room, both looking smaller and more fragile than I'd seen them in years. Mom looked up when I walked in, and for a moment, all the hurt and anger between us dissolved into shared grief. How is he? I asked, sitting down across from them. Stable, but serious, Mom said. The doctor said the next 48 hours are critical. We sat in that sterile waiting room for 3 days, taking turns sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and drinking terrible coffee from vending machines. For the first time in almost a year, we were just a family dealing with something bigger than our resentments. Grandpa survived, but the heart attack had been massive. The doctor explained that he'd need extensive rehabilitation and would never be able to work the way he used to. At 83, the man who'd built Nana's kitchen from nothing was finally being forced to slow down. "I'm sorry," Mom said to me on the third day as we sat together in the hospital cafeteria while Clara was visiting Grandpa. "I'm sorry for how I treated you, and I'm sorry it took almost losing Dad for me to say it." It wasn't a complete apology. There was no acknowledgement of the years of unfair treatment or the financial manipulation, but it was more than I'd ever expected to get. "I'm sorry too," I said, because I was. I was sorry that our family was so broken that it had taken a medical emergency to get us in the same room. Over the following weeks, as Grandpa recovered, the reality of his situation became clear. He wouldn't be able to help at the restaurant anymore, and Mom was struggling to keep up with everything alone. The two part-time dishwashers had both quit after a particularly busy Friday night, and Clara was overwhelmed trying to handle the front of house by herself. "We might have to sell," Mom told me during one of my hospital visits with Grandpa. "I can't run it by myself, and we can't afford to hire enough help to replace what Dad used to do." I felt a complex mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me was sad. Despite everything, Nana's kitchen was still the place where I'd grown up. But another part of me, a part I wasn't proud of, felt vindicated. This was what happened when you drove away the person who'd been holding everything together. Grandpa was awake during that particular conversation, and he spoke up from his hospital bed. "Maybe it's time," he said quietly. "I'm too old to fight anymore, and the business has never been the same since before your mother took over." The admission hung in the air like smoke. Mom's face crumpled, and I realized that she'd been carrying the weight of feeling like a failure for years, watching the restaurant slowly decline under her management compared to Grandpa's golden years. "It's not your fault, Mom," I said, and I meant it. "You never wanted to run a restaurant. You only did it because you had to." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue from the bedside table. "I was 19 and pregnant with no other options. I've been trapped there for 19 years, watching other people live the lives they chose while I served pasta to strangers who don't remember my name." It was the most honest thing she'd ever said to me. "So sell it," I said. "Take the money and do something you actually want to do." "Like what?" "I'm 38 years old with no college degree and no skills outside the restaurant industry. You could go to school. You could travel. You could figure out what makes you happy instead of what pays the bills." For the first time, I saw something like hope flicker in Mom's eyes. The conversation about selling Nana's kitchen continued over the next several weeks. Mom contacted a business broker and started the process of getting the restaurant appraised. The early estimates suggested she'd clear enough after paying off the debts to have a decent nest egg for starting over. What none of us knew was that I'd also been making some plans of my own. 3 days after Grandpa was released from the hospital, I got a call from someone I'd never expected to hear from, the family lawyer who'd handled Grandpa's will and estate planning for years. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, "I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding your grandfather's estate. There are some matters we need to discuss." "Is Grandpa okay? Is this about medical bills?" "Your grandfather is fine. This is about a trust that was established in your name several years ago. Now that you've graduated high school and are well into your college education, certain provisions have been triggered." "A trust? In my name?" I had no idea what he was talking about, but the serious tone in his voice suggested it was something significant. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday, and I spent the days leading up to it wondering what Grandpa could have possibly set aside for me. Maybe a few $1,000s for college, or some family heirlooms that held sentimental value. What I discovered in that lawyer's office would change the trajectory of not just my life, but my entire family's future in ways none of us could have imagined. Little did I know that the girl who'd been washing dishes for 11 years was about to become the one holding all the cards. Walking into that lawyer's office, I expected maybe a small college fund or some old family jewelry. What I got instead was a complete rewrite of my future, delivered by a balding man in a gray suit who spoke like he was reading a grocery list. "Miss Rodriguez, your grandfather established an educational trust in your name when you were 5 years old," Mr. Henderson said, sliding a thick manila folder across his mahogany desk. "The principal amount, plus accumulated interest over 14 years, comes to approximately $128,000. I'm pretty sure my jaw actually hit the floor. $128,000? That was more money than I'd ever imagined having in my entire lifetime. "There's more," Mr. Henderson continued, apparently unaware that he'd just turned my world upside down. "Your sister Clara has a similar trust, though hers won't be accessible until she completes her college education. Your grandfather was very specific about that requirement." "Clara had a trust too?" My mind was spinning, trying to process this information. Grandpa had been planning this for years, setting aside money that none of us knew existed. Did my mother know about these trusts? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. No. Your grandfather was adamant that the trusts remain confidential until each beneficiary met the educational requirements. He felt that knowledge of the inheritance might interfere with your motivation to pursue higher education. Smart man. If I'd known about this money when I was 16 and fighting with Mom about working for free, I might have been tempted to quit school and just wait for the payout. Grandpa knew me better than I knew myself. What are the restrictions on how I can use the money? I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the reality that I was suddenly wealthy by any reasonable standard. The money is yours to use as you see fit, with one caveat. Your grandfather included a letter explaining his hopes for how it would be used. Mr. Henderson handed me a sealed envelope with Laura, written in Grandpa's careful handwriting. I opened it with shaking hands. My dearest Laura, if you're reading this, it means you've graduated and are building the life you deserve. This money represents every dollar I could save from the restaurant's profits over the years, set aside not as charity, but as an investment in your potential. I've watched you work harder than anyone should have to, especially a child. I've seen your mother's fear turn into harshness, and I've seen how it's affected you. You deserve better, and this money is my way of making sure you have the freedom to choose your own path. Use it wisely, but don't be afraid to use it boldly. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one at all. All my love, Grandpa. I was definitely crying now, right there in the lawyer's office. This wasn't just money. It was validation from the one person who'd always believed in me, delivered from beyond the grave at exactly the moment I needed it most. Take your time, Mr. Henderson said kindly, pushing a box of tissues across the desk. As I sat there, wiping my eyes and rereading Grandpa's letter, a crazy idea started forming in my mind. Mom was planning to sell the restaurant. She needed the money to start over, and she was dreading the process of finding a buyer who would take care of Grandpa's legacy. What if the buyer was me? Mr. Henderson, I said slowly, hypothetically speaking, would this amount be enough to purchase a small restaurant? He leaned back in his chair, studying me with new interest. That would depend on the restaurant's value, debt load, and asking price. But for a small family establishment, it's certainly possible. The idea was insane. I was 19 years old with 3 years of college under my belt and a part-time job at Tony's Bistro. I had no business experience beyond washing dishes and taking orders, but I also knew Nona's kitchen better than anyone alive, understood its operations inside and out, and had ideas for improvements that Mom had never been interested in hearing. If someone wanted to make an offer on a restaurant, but keep their identity confidential until the sale was finalized, how would that work? Mr. Henderson smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. I take it this isn't entirely hypothetical anymore? Let's say it's not. Well, purchases through a trust or LLC are quite common in business acquisitions. It allows for confidentiality and can simplify the transaction process. I left that office with my head spinning and a cashier's check for $128,000 in my purse. More importantly, I left with a plan that would either be the smartest thing I'd ever done or the most spectacular failure in family history. Probably both, knowing my luck. The first thing I did was drive to Tony's and ask Mrs. Santos if she had a few minutes to talk. If I was going to do something this crazy, I needed advice from someone who actually knew how to run a successful restaurant. You want to buy your family's restaurant? She said after I'd explained the situation. The same restaurant you walked away from because they wouldn't pay you minimum wage? I know it sounds insane. It sounds perfect, she interrupted. Laura, you know that business better than anyone. You've seen what doesn't work, you understand the customer base, and you have fresh ideas that haven't been tried yet. Plus, you'd be saving a piece of family history. But I'm 19, and I've never managed anything bigger than a weekend dinner shift. Mrs. Santos laughed. Honey, I was 21 when I bought this place with money I'd saved from 3 jobs and a loan from my grandmother. Sometimes being young and fearless is exactly what a business needs. The validation meant everything, but I still had the practical matter of making an offer without revealing my identity. That's where Mr. Henderson earned his fee. He set up a limited liability company called Heritage Hospitality LLC and structured the purchase offer to come through the company rather than from me personally. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. Mom wanted to sell, and Heritage Hospitality was offering full asking price with a quick closing. She'd have no reason to dig too deeply into who was behind the LLC, especially since the offer was exactly what she'd been hoping for. The only tricky part would be keeping my mouth shut while watching her celebrate selling the restaurant to a mysterious buyer who was, in fact, her own daughter. But after years of keeping my thoughts to myself while scrubbing dishes, I figured I could manage a few more weeks of strategic silence. What I didn't anticipate was how hard it would be to watch Mom's relief and excitement about finally escaping the restaurant that had defined our entire family's life for decades. The phone call came 2 days after Mr. Henderson submitted the offer from Heritage Hospitality LLC. I was studying for my accounting midterm when Mom called, and her voice had an energy I hadn't heard in years. "Laura, the most amazing thing has happened," she said, practically breathless with excitement. "We got an offer on the restaurant. Full asking price, no contingencies, and they want to close within 3 weeks." I managed to sound appropriately surprised. "That's incredible, Mom. Who's buying it?" "Some investment company called Heritage Hospitality. The lawyer says they specialize in preserving family restaurants." "Isn't that perfect? I was so worried about selling to someone who would gut the place and turn it into a chain restaurant." The irony was almost too much. Here I was, having specifically chosen the name Heritage Hospitality to appeal to exactly those concerns, and Mom was falling for it completely. Sometimes being underestimated your whole life teaches you exactly how to be strategic. "That does sound perfect," I agreed. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Honestly? Relieved. I know that probably sounds terrible, but I've been carrying the weight of that place for 17 years. The thought of not having to worry about payroll and food costs and broken equipment, it feels like being able to breathe again. For the first time, I heard genuine happiness in my mother's voice when talking about the restaurant. Not the stressed, frustrated tone that had defined my childhood, but actual joy at the prospect of being free from it. "What will you do with the money?" I asked. "I've been thinking about that a lot. Maybe I'll go back to school, finish the degree I started before I got pregnant with you. Maybe I'll travel. I've never been outside of Texas. Can you believe that? I'm 36 years old and I've never seen the ocean." The wistful tone in her voice made me realize something important. Mom hadn't just been trapped by the restaurant financially, she'd been trapped emotionally. Every day she spent there was a reminder of dreams deferred and choices she hadn't been free to make. "That sounds wonderful, Mom." "It does, doesn't it? For the first time in years, I feel like I have possibilities instead of just obligations." After hanging up, I sat in my tiny apartment feeling a complex mix of emotions. I was happy that Mom would finally get her freedom, but I also felt the weight of what I was taking on. Buying the restaurant wasn't just about proving a point or getting revenge. I was now responsible for preserving something that had been the center of our family's life for decades. The due diligence process was surprisingly smooth. Heritage Hospitality's accountant, who was actually Mr. Henderson's business partner, reviewed the books and confirmed that while the restaurant was profitable, it was operating on thin margins that could be improved with better management and some strategic changes. "The bones are good," he told me during a conference call. "The location is excellent, the equipment is well maintained, and there's a solid base of regular customers. The main issues are operational inefficiency and lack of marketing. Both of those are fixable." I found myself getting excited about the possibilities. I'd been thinking about improvements to Nona's kitchen since I was old enough to have opinions, but no one had ever asked for my input. Now I'd have the freedom to implement all those ideas I'd been storing up for years. The first thing I wanted to do was update the menu. Mom had been serving basically the same dishes since she took over from Grandpa, but I'd learned at Tony's that customers appreciated seasonal specials and creative takes on classic dishes. The second priority was improving the efficiency of the kitchen operations. I knew exactly which processes were slowing things down and how to fix them, but the biggest change I wanted to make was in how employees were treated. Fair wages, clear expectations, and recognition for good work. Revolutionary concepts at Nana's kitchen, apparently. 2 weeks before closing, I had lunch with Clara for the first time since Grandpa's heart attack. She'd been working extra hours at the restaurant while Mom handled the sale preparations, and she looked exhausted. "I can't believe someone actually wants to buy that place," she said over her sandwich. "I mean, I love it because it's family, but it's so much work for so little profit." "What will you do when it sells?" I asked. "Mom says the new owners might want to keep some of the current staff, so maybe I'll stay on for a while. I'm thinking about going to culinary school, actually. All this time working in the kitchen has made me realize I actually enjoy cooking." That was news to me. Clara had always seemed more interested in the front of house work when we were kids. "When did you get interested in cooking?" "Honestly, after you left. Mom needed more help in the kitchen, so I had to learn. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at it. I've been experimenting with new recipes, but Mom's not interested in changing anything." I felt a pang of guilt hearing that. While I'd been focused on my own struggles, Clara had been dealing with the aftermath of my departure and discovering her own interests in the process. "Culinary school sounds perfect for you," I said. "You should definitely pursue that." "Maybe. It's expensive, though, and I don't have any savings." I almost told her about her trust fund right then, but caught myself. That wasn't my secret to reveal. and Clara needed to finish high school first anyway. You'll figure it out, I said instead. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for. The closing was scheduled for the following Friday at 10 a.m. Mom had decided to throw herself a birthday party the Saturday before, a combination celebration of turning 37 and farewell party for the restaurant. She'd invited the whole family and all the regular customers. It feels like the end of an era, she told me when she called with the invitation. I want to do something special to mark the transition. Perfect. A room full of family and friends, everyone celebrating Mom's newfound freedom and saying goodbye to Nona's kitchen as we'd always known it. It would be the ideal setting for revealing exactly who Heritage Hospitality LLC really was. I just had to survive 6 more days of keeping the biggest secret of my life. The closing took place in Mr. Henderson's conference room on a crisp Friday morning in October. Mom sat across from me. Well, across from the representative of Heritage Hospitality LLC, which happened to be me wearing a navy business suit I'd borrowed from Mrs. Santos and trying to look older than my 19 years. "So you're the mysterious buyer," Mom said with a smile, clearly relieved to finally meet the person taking over her life's burden. I have to admit, I was curious about who was behind Heritage Hospitality. I shook her hand professionally, hoping my voice wouldn't betray anything. We're committed to preserving the character and tradition of Nona's kitchen while bringing it into the modern market. That wasn't technically a lie. I absolutely plan to honor Grandpa's legacy while making the improvements the restaurant desperately needed. I just wasn't ready to reveal that "we" was actually me quite yet. The paperwork took 2 hours. Deed transfers, loan documents, equipment inventories, liquor license transfers, all the mundane details that officially made me the owner of the restaurant where I'd spent my entire childhood washing dishes for free. When Mr. Henderson handed me the keys, Mom actually got a little emotional. "Take care of her," she said, and I could tell she meant it. That place represents 3 generations of family history. My father built something beautiful there. "I understand the responsibility," I said, which was probably the most honest thing I'd said all morning. "The restaurant will be in good hands." After Mom left to deposit her check and start her new life, I sat alone in the empty conference room holding the keys to Nona's kitchen. 24 hours earlier, I'd been a college student with a part-time job and a head full of dreams. Now I was a business owner with employees, overhead, and the weight of family legacy resting on my shoulders. The smart thing would have been to wait until after Mom's party to take possession, to keep the secret a little longer and reveal everything in a controlled environment. But I couldn't resist the temptation to walk through my restaurant, while it was empty and quiet. Nona's kitchen looked different when I unlocked the door that afternoon. It was the same dining room I'd known since childhood, the same kitchen where I'd learned to work, but everything felt subtly transformed. This wasn't the place where I'd been the invisible dishwasher anymore. This was my domain. I walked through each section methodically, seeing it with new eyes. The dining room could seat 48 people comfortably, but with some rearrangement, we could probably fit 55. The kitchen was well-equipped but poorly organized. I could improve efficiency just by relocating some of the prep stations. The office was a disaster, with filing systems that seemed designed to make simple tasks complicated. But underneath all the operational issues, I could see the potential. This place had good bones, a loyal customer base, and a reputation for quality food. With some strategic improvements and actual investment in marketing, Nona's kitchen could be more successful than it had ever been. The first thing I did was sit down with the employee files. Mom had been running the restaurant with a skeleton crew, 2 part-time cooks, 3 servers who rotated shifts, and whatever family members were available to fill gaps. Everyone was being paid minimum wage with no benefits, no paid time off, and no real opportunities for advancement. That was going to change immediately. I spent the rest of the day making lists, improvements to implement, staff changes to make, menu items to test. By the time I locked up that evening, I had a comprehensive plan for the first 90 days of ownership. The hardest part was going home and pretending nothing had changed. When Clara called to ask how my day had been, I had to bite my tongue to keep from telling her that I'd spent the afternoon planning her future workplace. "Just studying," I said. "How's the prep going for Mom's party tomorrow?" "Good, I think. She's so excited about starting over. I haven't seen her this happy in years." "That's great. She deserves to be happy." "Laura, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you think you'll ever come back to work at the restaurant? I know things ended badly between you and Mom, but maybe the new owners would be interested in hiring someone with your experience." I almost laughed out loud. If only she knew. "I don't think that's likely," I said. "I'm pretty committed to finishing my degree right now." "I get that. I think you'd be really good at running a place like that." "You understood the business better than any of us, even when we were kids." Coming from Clara, who'd gotten all the recognition and praise growing up, That acknowledgement meant more than she could possibly know. Thanks, Clara. That means a lot. Saturday morning, I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. In 12 hours, I'd be revealing to my entire family that the broke college student they'd written off had just become their boss. Well, technically, Clara's boss. Mom would be free to start her new life, and I'd be the one responsible for carrying on Grandpa's legacy. I chose my outfit carefully. A simple black dress that was professional but not flashy, paired with the pearl necklace Grandpa had given me for my 18th birthday. If I was going to drop the biggest bombshell in family history, I wanted to look the part. The party was scheduled to start at 6 p.m., with dinner at 7 and toasts afterward. Perfect timing for a grand announcement that would cap off the evening and give everyone something to talk about for years to come. I arrived fashionably late, walking into the restaurant that was now mine while everyone assumed I was just another guest celebrating Mom's birthday and the end of an era. The irony was delicious. "Laura," Mom hugged me tight when she saw me. "I'm so glad you came. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but family is family. I wouldn't miss it," I said, looking around at the dining room full of relatives, family friends, and longtime customers. "This is really something special." "It's the perfect send-off," she agreed. "Tomorrow, this place starts a new chapter, and so do I." If she only knew how right she was. The party was everything Mom had hoped for. A perfect blend of nostalgia and celebration that honored the past while looking forward to new possibilities. Aunt Martha had made her famous tiramisu. Uncle Tony brought his guitar and played Italian folk songs that Grandpa used to hum while cooking. And even some of the regular customers had shown up to wish Mom well in her new adventure. I spent the first hour mingling and making small talk, all while carrying the secret that would change everything. Mrs. Peterson was there. The same woman who'd slipped Clara $20 years ago while treating me like kitchen equipment, complimenting Mom on how lovely the restaurant looked and asking about her plans for retirement. "I'm thinking about going back to school," Mom told her, practically glowing with excitement. "Maybe studying education, like I always wanted to do before life got in the way." "How wonderful! And what about the restaurant? I heard it sold to some investment company?" "Heritage Hospitality. They seem committed to maintaining the family atmosphere while modernizing the operations. I'm actually looking forward to seeing what they do with the place." I nearly choked on my wine. Mom was literally describing my business plan to someone while I stood 3 feet away, invisible as always. Clara appeared at my elbow, looking slightly overwhelmed by her hostess duties. "Can you believe this turnout?" she said, gesturing around the packed dining room. "Mom invited half the town. She deserves a good send-off," I said. 17 years of running this place. That's no small accomplishment. I'm going to miss it, you know. Even though it was a lot of work, there's something special about this place. I hope the new owners understand that. "I'm sure they will," I said, fighting back a smile. As the evening progressed, I found myself watching my family with new eyes. Clara was working the room like she'd been born to it, remembering everyone's names and making them feel welcome. She really did have a gift for hospitality, something that would serve her well in the restaurant industry if she chose to pursue it. Mom was radiant, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the grace of someone who'd finally found peace with a difficult chapter of her life. Even some of the older relatives who'd always treated me as an afterthought were being unusually friendly. Cousin Maria, who'd never acknowledged my existence at family gatherings, actually sought me out to ask about college. "Your mom says you're studying business? That's so practical. Much more sensible than some of the silly majors kids choose these days." Practical. There was that word again. But for once, it didn't sting. Being practical had served me well. Practical enough to save money. Practical enough to work multiple jobs, and practical enough to recognize an opportunity when it presented itself. At 7:30, Mom called everyone to attention for the toasts. She'd positioned herself near the kitchen pass-through, the same spot where I'd watched countless interactions from the shadows over the years. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she began, her voice carrying easily across the hushed dining room. "This restaurant has been the center of my life for 17 years, and saying goodbye to it feels like closing a book that's defined my entire adult life." There were murmurs of appreciation from the crowd, and I saw several longtime customers wiping their eyes. "My father built something beautiful here," Mom continued, "and I've tried my best to honor his legacy while raising my daughters and keeping the business running. But I'll be honest, I'm ready for a new adventure. I'm ready to find out who I am when I'm not defined by pasta sauce and prep schedules." Laughter rippled through the room. Even Mom's jokes were landing tonight. The new owners seem to understand what makes this place special, and I'm confident that Nana's Kitchen will continue to serve this community for generations to come. So please, raise your glasses to new beginnings, for the restaurant and for me. Everyone raised their glasses, including me. The irony of toasting my own secret business acquisition while pretending to be just another family member was almost too much to handle. To new beginnings, the room chorused. As people began to disperse and return to their conversations, I caught Clara's eye across the room. She was helping clear some of the appetizer plates, even though this was supposed to be a party rather than a working event. Old habits die hard in restaurant families. I made my way over to where Mom was accepting hugs and congratulations from various guests. This was it. The perfect moment for the revelation that would either be remembered as the most brilliant surprise in family history or the most shocking betrayal, depending on your perspective. "Mom," I said, touching her arm lightly, "could I say something to the group?" She looked surprised but pleased. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm sure everyone would love to hear from you." I walked to the same spot where she'd given her toast, looking out at the room full of family and friends who thought they knew exactly who I was and what my place in this story would be. The butterflies in my stomach had evolved into full-sized pterodactyls, but I'd never felt more sure of anything in my life. "Excuse me, everyone," I called out, and the conversations gradually died down. "I have something I'd like to share with you all." Mom beamed at me from the front row, probably expecting some sentimental speech about family and tradition. Clara smiled encouragingly from where she stood near the kitchen door. Even Mrs. Peterson looked mildly interested in what the practical daughter might have to say. None of them had any idea that in the next 60 seconds, everything they thought they knew about me was about to change forever. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate Mom and the incredible legacy of Nana's Kitchen," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "This restaurant has been the center of our family's life for decades, and it holds memories and traditions that are irreplaceable." Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. So far, so good. Everyone was expecting a sentimental tribute to family and tradition. When Mom told me she'd found buyers who understood the importance of preserving that legacy, I was thrilled. It's not easy to find people who appreciate both the business potential and the emotional significance of a place like this. Mom's smile was getting wider by the second, clearly proud that her daughter was finally showing proper appreciation for the family business. So I was especially pleased to learn that Heritage Hospitality LLC shares our values about family restaurants and community traditions. Clara nodded enthusiastically from her spot near the kitchen. Even she was buying into this build-up. "In fact," I continued, reaching into my purse for the leather folder I'd carefully prepared, "I was so impressed with Heritage Hospitality's vision for Nona's Kitchen that I decided to get more involved with their plans." I pulled out the official ownership documents, still keeping them close to my chest. "Which is why I'm excited to announce that Heritage Hospitality LLC has asked me to serve as the new general manager of Nona's Kitchen." The room erupted in surprised applause. Mom's face lit up like Christmas morning. Clearly, she was thrilled that the new owners had recognized my potential and offered me a leadership role. "That's wonderful, Laura," she called out over the clapping. "I always knew you had management potential." I held up my hand to quiet the room, savoring this moment of suspended disbelief before everything changed forever. "Actually, Mom, there's one more thing." I opened the folder and held up the deed transfer documents. Heritage Hospitality LLC didn't just offer me a management position. Heritage Hospitality LLC is me. I'm the new owner of Nana's Kitchen. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a breadcrumb drop. 48 people stared at me like I'd just announced I was an alien from outer space. Mom's mouth fell open. Clara's eyes went wide as dinner plates. Mrs. Peterson looked like she was having a minor stroke. "I used my inheritance from Grandpa," I continued into the stunned silence. "The educational trust he set up years ago that none of you knew about. Yesterday morning, I officially became the owner of the restaurant where I spent my childhood washing dishes and dreaming about the day when my work would actually be valued." The reactions were immediate and varied. Cousin Maria started whispering frantically to her husband. Uncle Tony's guitar playing stopped mid-chord. Aunt Martha began laughing. Actual, delighted laughter that filled the shocked silence. But I was only watching two faces, Mom's and Clara's. Clara recovered first, a slow smile spreading across her face as the implications sank in. "You bought the restaurant? Laura, that's incredible." Mom, on the other hand, looked like she was processing the information in stages. First confusion, then realization, then something that might have been pride, or might have been shock. I couldn't tell which. "Your Heritage Hospitality?" she said finally. "I am. And before anyone starts worrying, nothing changes about your buyout, Mom. You got exactly the deal you wanted, with exactly the timeline you needed. The money is in your account, and you're free to start your new life just like we discussed." "But how? When? How long have you been planning this?" "Since the day I met with Grandpa's lawyer and learned about the trust. I realized I had the opportunity to save something that means everything to our family while finally getting the chance to prove what I'm capable of." Mrs. Peterson finally found her voice. You mean to tell me that quiet little girl who used to wash dishes is now the owner of this restaurant? I turned to look at her directly, remembering every slight and dismissal from my childhood. That quiet little girl learned every aspect of this business while everyone else was focused on appearances. Turns out, knowing how to actually run a restaurant is more valuable than knowing how to look pretty while serving it. The room was still processing, but I could see the shift happening. People were reassessing, recalibrating their understanding of who I'd been versus who I actually was. "Laura," Mom said, and her voice was strange. Not angry, not upset, but something else entirely. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "Mom, you wanted out, and now you're out. I wanted in, and now I'm in. It's a win-win situation." "But you're so young. Running a restaurant is incredibly difficult." "I know. I've been doing it unpaid since I was 5 years old." That landed with the impact I'd intended. Several people in the crowd actually winced. Clara stepped forward, and to my surprise, she was grinning. "Can I still work here?" she asked, because I was actually hoping the new owners would keep me on, and if the new owner is my sister. "Actually," I said, pulling out another folder, "I was hoping you'd consider staying on as head server while you finish high school. And if you're serious about culinary school, I'd like to help you apply. This place could use some fresh menu ideas." Clara's face absolutely glowed. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. I'll pay you properly, give you real experience, and support your education. It's what family should do." The room was watching this exchange like a tennis match, but I could see approval in many faces. Even some of the relatives who'd always dismissed me were looking impressed. Mom was still staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "I can't believe you did this," she said finally. "I can't believe you actually did this." "Neither can I, honestly. But here we are. Are you angry with me? Is this some kind of revenge?" I considered the question seriously. "It's not revenge, Mom. It's opportunity. You get to start fresh, I get to build something meaningful, and Clara gets to learn the business properly. Grandpa would be proud." At the mention of Grandpa, something shifted in Mom's expression. The shock was fading, replaced by something that looked like wonder. "He really would be, wouldn't he? He always said you understood this business better than any of us. He saw potential in me when no one else did. Now I get to honor that." The crowd was starting to buzz with conversation again as people processed what had just happened. I could hear fragments of discussion, surprise, admiration, and probably a fair amount of gossip material that would fuel family gatherings for years to come. But the most important conversation was happening right in front of me, with the two people whose approval had mattered most to me my entire life, even when I'd convinced myself it didn't. The party transformed after my announcement. What had started as a farewell celebration became something more like a coronation, with longtime customers coming up to congratulate me and share their hopes for the restaurant's future. Even Mrs. Peterson approached me with what might have been respect in her eyes. "I must admit, I underestimated you completely," she said, extending her hand for a proper handshake. "Your grandfather always spoke highly of your work ethic, but I thought he was just being a doting grandfather." "Grandpa saw things other people missed," I replied, accepting her handshake, including potential in a girl who spent too much time in the back to be noticed up front. After the crowd began to thin out around 10 p.m., I found myself alone with Mom and Clara in the dining room that was now officially mine. We'd sent the last guests home with takeout containers of leftover birthday cake, and the three of us were sitting at table 6, the same table where Mrs. Peterson used to slip Clara $20 bills while ignoring my existence. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream," Mom said, shaking her head. 3 hours ago, I thought I was selling to strangers. Now my daughter owns the family restaurant. How does it feel?" I asked. "Really?" Mom was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "Honestly, it feels perfect. I was terrified about selling to people who might not understand what this place means, but you know every inch of this restaurant. You understand its history and its potential better than anyone, even though I'm 19 and have no formal business experience. Especially because you're 19. You have the energy and vision to take this place further than I ever could. I was just trying to survive here. You're planning to thrive." Clara had been uncharacteristically quiet through this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Laura, can I ask you something? How long have you been planning this? Because the way you handled everything tonight, that wasn't spontaneous." I smiled. "Since the day I met with Mr. Henderson and learned about the inheritance. But honestly, I think I've been preparing for this my whole life without realizing it." "What do you mean?" "Every dish I washed taught me about kitchen efficiency. Every order I watched you take taught me about customer service. Every mistake I saw Mom make taught me about business management. I was getting a master class in restaurant operations from age 5. I just didn't know it was an education at the time." Mom laughed, but it wasn't bitter. So all those years I thought you were just helping out. You were actually learning how to replace me? Not replace you, Mom. Succeed you. There's a difference. What are your plans? Clara asked. Are you going to change everything? Some things, I admitted. The menu needs updating. We've been serving the same dishes for 10 years. The kitchen workflow could be more efficient. And I want to implement proper employee benefits and training programs. What about the staff? Everyone who wants to stay can stay, as long as they're willing to adapt to new standards. I'm planning to pay better wages and offer real advancement opportunities. Clara's eyes lit up. And you really meant what you said about culinary school? Absolutely. If you're serious about it, I'll help you apply and arrange your work schedule around classes. This place needs someone with formal culinary training, and I'd rather that someone be family. What about college for me? Clara asked. Culinary school is college, Clara. It's professional education that leads to a career you're passionate about. That's more valuable than any generic degree. For the first time, I saw Clara looking at me with something like admiration rather than just affection. I can't believe my big sister is going to be my boss, she said with a grin. I can't believe my little sister is going to help me revolutionize this place, I replied. Mom stood up and walked over to the framed photo of Grandpa that hung near the kitchen entrance. It was taken in 1987, the day he'd opened Nona's kitchen, and he was beaming with pride and possibility. He would be so proud of you, she said softly. Not just because you bought the restaurant, but because of how you did it, with dignity and planning and respect for everyone involved. I learned that from him, I said. He always treated people fairly, even when it cost him. And I didn't, Mom said, turning back to face me. I know that, Laura. I know I treated you unfairly for years, and I know buying this restaurant doesn't erase that history. It's not about erasing history, Mom. It's about writing a better future. She nodded, and I could see tears in her eyes. I'm proud of you, she said simply. I should have been saying that for years, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of the woman you've become, and I'm grateful that Grandpa's legacy is in your hands. 3 months later, Nona's kitchen reopened after a brief renovation with an updated menu, improved operations, and a staff that was properly trained and fairly compensated. Clara had enrolled in culinary school and was working part-time as our sous chef, bringing fresh ideas and professional techniques to balance our traditional recipes. Mom used her money from the sale to enroll in a teaching program at the state university. She sent me postcards from her travels during school breaks, the ocean in California, the mountains in Colorado, all the places she'd dreamed of seeing while trapped behind a stove for 17 years. A year later, when Clara turned 18 and gained access to her own inheritance, she used the money to buy half the restaurant and become my official business partner. We split responsibilities based on our strengths. I handled operations and business development while she managed the kitchen and menu innovation. The restaurant thrived under our partnership, earning recognition from local food critics and building a reputation that extended far beyond our original customer base. We opened for lunch service, added catering options, and even began offering cooking classes on Sunday afternoons. But the most satisfying moment came on a busy Friday night when I was expediting orders in the kitchen and overheard 2 customers talking at table 6. The food here has gotten incredible, one woman said to her companion. Ever since those young women took over, it's like a completely different restaurant. I heard one of them used to wash dishes here as a child, the other woman replied. Now she owns the place. It's like something out of a movie. I smiled as I plated their entrees, thinking about that little girl who used to stand on a wooden crate to reach the sink. She'd grown up to prove that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the person who's been paying attention all along. If this story resonated with you, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button for more incredible true stories of family, determination, and the sweet taste of proving everyone wrong. Drop a comment below and tell me about a time when you surprised everyone by achieving something they never thought you could do.